So this week's episode of Garo Vanishing Line was an extremely enjoyable but very powerful episode, both with character growth and just mental shattering just all around these characters. I especially like what they did with Sophie and her pretty much blaming herself and being so crushed at what ultimately happened to her brother because of ultimately this entire plan. The king of El Dorado was in that ring wanting to possess this guy who was basically just trying to make this paradise for people, but ultimately it was going to be used as a horror feeding ground. And it's interesting to learn that Sophie's brother had no dark intent. The only thing that he cared about, the only thing that he wanted was his sister's happiness. So it's interesting to see that backstory and actually see just how confused these people were. It's like, no matter how much we try to get him to have his own desires so that the king can obviously possess him, he ultimately can't. And the only thing that was able to actually turn Sophie's brother into a horror was Sophie herself, being so angry because Sophie was convinced that he was possessed, which it seems like he actually wasn't fully possessed. If he would have removed that ring, if he would have stayed calm, he probably would have been fine. But ultimately, because Sophie opened his eyes to the world and ultimately tried to kill her brother, set his mind in motion and ultimately allowed for the possession to happen, which is damn powerful. Sword tells Sophie to not blame herself, it wasn't her fault, and I understand why he said that, but it is her fault, but it's not her fault because of something that she willingly did. I like it when anime have these moments where characters mess up, not directly and on purpose, but they mess up and they have to shoulder the blame. They have to carry that weight and keep moving forward, and I like that Sophie did that at the end because it's powerful. It shows that she's accepting the consequences of her actions, and I really like that moment overall. And I saw a lot of people last week say that the design for the king was very lackluster. Garo has had a lot of really good horror designs this season, a lot of remarkable and really carefully detailed and just unique designs. And you can look at the king's design at first glance and say, it's so basic, it's just like this white design with like a head coming out of his chest at some points. But I actually think it's one of the more interesting designs in the series, because typically when I would think of Garo, if I was thinking of like the final villain of the series, I would think they would go the route of making like a Satan-like design in like modern day, like, you know, giant big horns, some crazy tentacles coming out. It'd be something ridiculous and just overly bombastic, but they went the opposite route. They went something very more kind of like different. When I look at the king's design, I actually feel like he is the king. He's something that is an oddball. He looks like he's not that menacing, but at the same time, he's completely menacing. And I just think it's the perfect design for the king. I thought I wouldn't want to see every horror to look like that, but because it is the king of El Dorado, it actually makes a whole lot of sense in my eyes. Now, Zaraba's return was completely unexpected. I did not expect to see that whatsoever, but it does make sense because Zaraba is this ring that seemingly kind of goes from Garo to Garo, it kind of seems like. But Gina did her thing when she went to refuel, and ultimately Zaraba got to come back, and I did like that reunion. I'm sure some people are going to say it removes that sacrifice, but Zaraba wasn't a normal human. The fact that he can come back, it does make sense. I wasn't expecting it in this season, but I'm glad it did happen because ultimately, you just got that badass moment of literally Sword and Sophie riding up buildings, which is completely nonsensical, but it just adds to that Garo moment, because sometimes the stuff that doesn't make sense can be the most fun aspects to a Garo anime, and I just love the music when they were kind of blasting through all those horrors who were surrounding them. It was just good overall. But it's pretty interesting how the episode ends, because a lot of people were saying Sword's obviously going to be the one who's going to defeat the Dark Knight, but if they did go that route, I think it would be a little lackluster, because it's Luke who needs to defeat the Dark Knight. It's him and his personal struggles and finally facing the demons that he's been kind of running away from all his life. And of course, the Queen's still there as well, so it's going to be a 2v2, Gina, Luke versus Queen, as well as the Dark Knight there. And I can't wait to see that battle and see how Luke is going to be able to overcome his own demons and ultimately be able to move past the darkness in his own past. And that kiss at the end with Gina going for Sword, I'm glad they did that, because it was pretty much built up this entire season that obviously Gina likes Sword. So I'm glad they at least showed that, yeah, they are eventually going to go places, as long as both characters live, granted. But it was nice overall. Like, the episode had a lot of good balance in just structure. Like, it had its emotional moments, especially with all the Sophie moments, but also Sophie accepting the consequences and understanding that her brother truly did love her and gave her admin access, which is something that they need to use in order to free the souls that have been trapped from the king. And I absolutely love that, but there's all these kind of like more reunion moments. It honestly feels like the pinnacle. It feels like everything is coming full circle. We have 2 episodes left, and it feels like this is the proper pacing it needs to. I just really enjoyed this episode. I thought it was a very fun episode. It was enjoyable, had its action, had its ups and downs. It was a roller coaster of a ride and definitely sets up next week in a phenomenal way, and I can't wait to see where it goes. But let me know your thoughts down in that comment section below. And before we leave, smack that like button, share your support. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.